Welcome to Legacy Files Official, where we explore the pivotal moments and figures that shaped history. Today we delve into the life of Vladimir Lenin, a man whose actions irrevocably altered the course of the 20th century. His story is one of rebellion, radical ideology, and the dramatic overthrow of an empire. Get ready to uncover the forces that forged a revolutionary leader and forever changed Russia. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was born on April 22, 1870, in Simbirsk, over 700 kilometers east of Moscow. His father, Ilya Nikolaevich Ulyanov, a self-made man who rose from serfdom in 1831 to become a state councillor, brought the family into the minor Russian nobility. Vladimir's mother, Maria Alexandrovna Blank, had mixed European ancestry. Vladimir's early life was comfortable, marked by a sharp intellect and a talent for chess. But this upper-middle-class idyll was shattered by tragedy. In January 1886, his father died. The very next year, a devastating blow. His older brother Alexander, then a student at St. Petersburg State University, was implicated in a conspiracy to assassinate Alexander III, the ruler of the Russian Empire. Alexander was executed shortly thereafter. This event profoundly impacted Vladimir, igniting his descent into extremist politics. To understand Vladimir's radicalization, we must grasp the volatile political landscape of Russia in the second half of the 19th century. Despite centuries of isolation and later efforts by figures like Peter I and Catherine the Great to modernize the vast Russian Empire, it remained backward in many respects. Serfdom still predominated, tying commoners to the land as virtual slaves. The economy was resoundingly rural. The Orthodox Church held immense power, and the country was incredibly authoritarian, ruled by the czars and the nobility in their own interest. Compared to the emerging modern nations of the 19th century, like the United States, Britain, and France, the Russian Empire looked politically and socially backwards. The brief liberal reforms under Alexander II, who famously ended serfdom in 1861, inadvertently let the genie out of the bottle. New radical ideas from writers like Fyodor Dostoevsky ignited discussions of anarchism, nihilism, and communism. Groups like the People's Will emerged, ultimately assassinating Alexander II in 1881. His son, Alexander III, then launched a severe crackdown on liberal dissent. The Russia Vladimir grew up in during the 1880s was truly a powder keg of political discontent and instability. In 1887, Vladimir arrived at Kazan University, only to be expelled almost immediately for protesting government crackdowns. This brief but impactful experience ignited his political radicalization. He read voraciously, quickly drawn to the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their vision of replacing bourgeois capitalist society with one where the industrial proletariat took everything into communal ownership deeply appealed to him, especially as industrialization slowly began to advance in Russian cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. By 1893, Lenin moved to St. Petersburg, where he joined a revolutionary communist cell, calling themselves Social Democrats. He quickly caught the eye of the secret police. His politics radicalized further after he met and formed a relationship with Nadezhda Krupskaya, or Nadia, a schoolteacher who shared his radical Marxist views. Their involvement in the underground publishing of Marxist pamphlets led to their arrest in 1895. After over a year of detention, Lenin was sentenced in 1896 to 3 years in exile in Siberia. Nadia joined him there in 1898, and they were wed. While in Siberian exile, he began working on his book, The Development of Capitalism in Russia, published under the pseudonym Vladimir in 1899. His exile ended in 1900, but authorities forbade his return to St. Petersburg. He briefly settled in Pskov, where he helped publish a new revolutionary newspaper, Iskra, The Spark. Realizing he faced rearrest, he left Russia in 1900 for Switzerland, then Munich in 1901, and finally London by 1902. It was at this time that he began writing under the name that would become synonymous with revolution, Lenin. It was in London, in 1902, that Lenin composed his most famous written work, What Is to Be Done. In it, he rejected the common communist view that the proletariat would inevitably move society to socialism. Instead, Lenin argued for a more interventionist line, believing a revolutionary movement was needed to actively guide them, if needs be, by overt armed struggle. He famously conceived of the Russian communist movement as the vanguard of the proletariat, a disciplined group that would lead Russia and eventually Europe towards communism. This introduced a significant and, as history would show, dangerous idea. If the Russian Communist Party was responsible for the global movement, then all manner of conduct by the Russian communist movement could be justified. In 1903, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, RSDLP, held its second party congress in London. A deep division emerged between two factions. Julius Martov argued for broad party membership to appeal to as many people as possible, noting that industrial workers there still only constituted 3% of the population in Russia. Lenin, however, insisted that membership should be restricted to more committed revolutionaries. When a vote was held in November, the party formally split. Lenin's group became known as the Bolsheviks, meaning majority, and the other faction became the Mensheviks, meaning minority. A confusing irony, given the Bolsheviks were initially the smaller group. This split, fueled by Lenin's acrimonious treatise, One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, saw the Bolsheviks gradually gain control over the RSDLP's Central Committee by early 1905. The timing was crucial as Russia exploded. On January 22, 1905, a peaceful procession of thousands of unarmed workers marched on the Tsar's Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Government forces opened fire, killing over 150 people and injuring hundreds in what became known as Bloody Sunday. This, coupled with Russia's humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, incited the revolution of 1905. Workers struck, portions of the army mutinied, and agrarian unrest spread. Lenin returned to Russia, quickly establishing the new communist newspaper Novaya Zhizn, New Life. In October 1905, Tsar Nicholas II issued the October Manifesto, granting civil rights and promising a new Russian parliament, the Duma. This temporarily ended the crisis, but Nicholas soon reneged on most of his promises. The State Duma proved largely ineffective, and martial law was quickly imposed. Political dissent was crushed across Russia. By 1907, Lenin and the Bolsheviks realized the 1905 revolution had been a false dawn, and a return to exile in Western Europe, where their activities were more tolerated, was necessary. The years between 1907 and 1914 were a period of decline for Lenin. His influence within the RSDLP seemed to ebb, and his and Nadia's health began to decline. The formal split between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks into separate political parties occurred in 1912. However, the opportunity for Lenin to re-establish himself and for the Russian communist movement to reignite itself emerged unexpectedly with the outbreak of the First World War in July 1914. Lenin was in Galicia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when war broke out. After a brief imprisonment due to his Russian citizenship, he proved he was no supporter of the Tsarist regime and was released. He and Nadia headed to neutral Switzerland, where they spent the next 2 years. Here, Lenin continued to write, publishing Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, in 1917. His political thought matured, notably in his rejection of Marx's idea that a state must transition through a bourgeois democracy before a socialist revolution. Lenin theorized it was possible for a state to move straight from autocracy to a socialist revolution. This experiment would soon be attempted in Russia. Meanwhile, Russia's war effort was proceeding dismally. The Russian army was poorly commanded and faced the highly effective German Imperial Army. Tsar Nicholas II, taking command himself, only compounded matters. By the end of 1916, severe food shortages and social unrest escalated across Russia. Disaffection with the Tsarist government was at an all-time high, partly due to concerns about Grigory Rasputin's influence. On February 23, 1917, mass protests erupted in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. Over the next week, the Tsarist government lost control. By early March, the military was unwilling to save Nicholas II, who, surrounded by hostile troops, abdicated on March 3, 1917. The brief February Revolution brought the Romanov dynasty to an end after 300 years of ruling Russia. In Switzerland, Lenin immediately prepared to return to Russia. His uncompromising stance against the war had revived his power within the Bolshevik movement. The German government, hoping to destabilize Russia, provided a sealed train for him and other Russian dissidents. By April 16, 1917, Lenin's train pulled into Petrograd. The new provisional government, formed by the Duma, was already in trouble, with Russian lines on the Eastern Front collapsing due to desertions and lack of leadership. Lenin immediately began bolstering the Bolshevik cause, addressing large rallies of proletarian workers and distributing his April theses, which called for a new government based on workers' councils, or Soviets. Tensions escalated, culminating in the July days, violent demonstrations fueled by Bolshevik agitation. The provisional government responded by suppressing the Bolsheviks, forcing Lenin to flee to the semi-autonomous Grand Duchy of Finland. Other senior members, like Leon Trotsky, were arrested in Petrograd. From Helsinki in the early autumn of 1917, Lenin and his followers plotted a new counter-revolution. The provisional government was effectively living on borrowed time. When the commander-in-chief of the Russian military, General Lava Kornilov, attempted a military takeover, the provisional government was forced to turn to the communists and their Soviets for help, which significantly strengthened the Bolsheviks. Lenin slipped back into the capital in early October, where Leon Trotsky had been elected head of the Petrograd Soviet. The Bolsheviks had also skillfully outflanked the Mensheviks by maintaining their uncompromising stance. By the time Lenin returned, the moment was wholly propitious for the Bolsheviks to try to seize power. The coup in Petrograd on November 7, 1917, or October 25 in the Julian calendar, lauded by the communist movement as the October Revolution, was a seminal moment in modern world history. After weeks of planning, armed militias were prepared. Despite the provisional government's awareness, they couldn't stop it. Lenin and Trotsky called on the Military Revolutionary Committee and the Soviets to occupy government buildings on October 25th. By day's end, most of Petrograd and Moscow were under Bolshevik control. The following day, Bolshevik Red Guards entered the Winter Palace, effectively removing the provisional government from power. That evening, a Congress of Russia's workers' councils the Soviets declared a new socialist government. While talk of a communist state was initially limited to avoid alienating the predominantly agrarian population, that is what was effectively established. Within days of seizing power, the revolutionaries outlined their intentions. The vast, polyglot Russian Empire, stretching from the Baltic to the Pacific, incorporated a diverse array of peoples. The Declaration of the Rights of the Peoples of Russia, issued on November 2, 1917, and signed by Lenin and Joseph Stalin, affirmed equality and sovereignty for all ethnic groups and abolished religious and national privileges. This was a striking testament to the idealism of the Bolshevik Revolution at its outset, suggesting an end to imperialism. Yet, within months, the communist regime would completely renege on this promise. The October Revolution did not immediately create a one-party state. Elections for a constituent assembly, planned by the provisional government, proceeded in early 1918. But the Bolsheviks, formally rechristened as the Russian Communist Party in March 1918, aspired to absolute power. Real power became increasingly vested in the workers' councils, Soviets, and centrally, the political bureau or Politburo of the Russian Communist Party. The party launched a concentrated campaign of expelling Mensheviks and other socialist groups from these bodies. By the end of 1918, the Russian Communist Party had effectively turned Russia into a one-party state. Lenin emerged as the head of this new communist state, chairing Sovnarkom, Council of People's Commissars, which oversaw the governance of the Soviets. He relocated to the Kremlin in Moscow as the most powerful figure. This power came at a cost: 3 serious assassination attempts on his life in 1918. The third, on August 30, 1918, left him badly wounded, severely impacting his already precarious health. Economic reforms were swift. The Decree on Land, on November 8, 1917, confiscated all land from the nobility and Orthodox Church for redistribution. Major industries and factories were brought under state ownership. New labor laws included an 8-hour workday. Banking, transport, trade, and communications were nationalized. The Tsarist legal system was replaced by people's courts. Communist ideology also rejected religion, leading to the separation of church and state in January 1918, and the state began providing free education and tackling widespread illiteracy. Lenin's government desperately needed peace with Germany to consolidate power. On March 3, 1918, Russia signed the incredibly punitive Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, ceding vast territories, including the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine. This allowed the nascent communist state to focus on the brewing civil war. The primary enemy was the White Army, a broad alliance of counter-revolutionaries. By spring 1918, significant parts of Russia were in their hands. The end of World War I saw victorious powers like Britain, France, the United States, and Japan determined to overthrow the new communist state, supplying enormous resources to the White Army and dispatching expeditionary forces. Faced with existential threats, Lenin and his associates, like Trotsky and Stalin, began unleashing state terror. In December 1917, Lenin ordered the creation of the Emergency Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, better known as the Cheka. Its leader, Felix Dzerzhinsky, was given wide-ranging powers to root out enemies of the state. Within weeks, hundreds and then thousands of perceived enemies of the state were being arrested and executed without trial. Many were sent to labor camps in the remote, inhospitable climes of Siberia. While Lenin tried to distance himself from the Red Terror, he was at the head of a state that revived the worst elements of the Tsarist regime to create the architecture of a security state. Brutal methods, including Trotsky's blocking units that shot retreating Red Army soldiers, were employed. Despite early struggles, these brutal tactics proved effective. By 1919, the Red Army went on the offensive, reasserting control over Ukraine and forcing Allied expeditionary forces to evacuate. By the end of 1920, the Russian Civil War was largely won. Lenin's attention also turned to international communism. Disillusioned with moderate Western socialist movements, he established the Communist International, Comintern, in March 1919 in Moscow, which became a major instrument of international communism led by the Soviet Union. In spring 1921, with the Civil War winding down, Lenin promulgated the New Economic Policy, NEP. This surprising shift allowed a capitalist free market to continue operating on a limited basis in Russia, with small-scale private ownership. The NEP provided a major boost to the Russian economy during a severe famine, but it would be gradually abandoned in the course of the 1920s. Leninism, his unique brand of communist thought, diverged from classical Marxism. Its core idea was a dictatorship of the proletariat, where a small vanguard party would lead any nation, regardless of industrial development, to communism. This important development had a profound impact on the 20th century. Lenin's health declined sharply after 1918. He suffered several strokes in 1922 and 1923, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to speak. He died on January 21, 1924. In his last testament in winter 1922, he expressed concerns about Joseph Stalin, deeming him overly ambitious, and instead approved Leon Trotsky as his successor. However, Stalin outmaneuvered Trotsky, sending him incorrect details of the funeral arrangements, so he missed Lenin's funeral. Stalin eventually drove Trotsky into exile and monopolized power by 1929, ruling in a totalitarian fashion, murdering millions. Lenin, the man born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, became one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. While he was not Joseph Stalin, the highly totalitarian state he brought into being allowed for Stalin's rise. What do you think of Lenin's legacy? If he had lived longer, would a more benign Soviet Union have emerged, or was the path to totalitarianism already set? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And thank you for watching this Legacy Files official presentation.